than ideal lighting conditions, the image becomes muddy and soft. The battery life on the Moto G is more than enough for most people. It comes in at 2070 milliamps, but this is listed as a negative because it should be more like 2300 milliamps. But like I said, for most casual people, this phone can last them a whole day. The last negative of the Moto G is that it does not have LTE for fast mobile data, but just like the last gen, it should be updated to have an LTE model soon. The next phone costs $350 off contract, and this is the Nexus 5, and the positives go as following. It has a 5-inch 1080p display, a slim build, but one of the biggest positives of the Nexus 5 is its high-end specs. It's packing a quad-core Snapdragon 800 CPU clocked in at 2.3 GHz, 2 GB of RAM, along with that fantastic 1080p display that I mentioned. And because this is a Nexus, it gets the latest updates from Google the fastest, so it already is upgradable to Android 5.0, which in itself makes the Nexus 5 feel and act like a whole new phone, and that is something that should not be overlooked when considering this phone. The Nexus 5 has a 2300 mAh battery capacity, which I was going to list as a negative, but with the new 5.0 Lollipop update, the battery life has been noticeably improved because of its new optimizations and new features to save the battery life. The only real negative of the Nexus 5 is its camera quality. So it is equipped with an 8 megapixel lens that actually has optical image stabilization, but for having those specs, it definitely should produce better looking images, especially in low light conditions. Swiftly moving on, the last budget phone to consider is the infamous OnePlus One. Now this phone is kind of odd because it only costs $299 completely off contract, but it has the same specs and capabilities as phones that cost more than twice as much. So for those of you spec heads, it has a quad-core Snapdragon 801 CPU with 3 GB of RAM, a 5.5-inch 1080p display, a 13 megapixel camera that can film in 2160p. It basically has it all, but the only negative of this phone is that right now it is close to impossible to actually buy one of these phones. And that is due to the fact that this OnePlus One is always sold out and uses this invite-only system. But hopefully soon you will be able to buy this phone like you would with any other device. But this is one of those classic situations of high demand and low supply. So that's the end of the budget phone segment. Now it's time for the big kahunas. I find it only just to begin the list with the Google Nexus 6, because this is the newest of the bunch and possibly the best option, especially if you're a geek. So the positives. This phone has a beautiful high-res 6-inch display with a 2K resolution. It also uses AMOLED technology, which, let's face facts, is much better than IPS. And Google wanted this awesome display to show off the new Android 5.0 Lollipop operating system, because being a Nexus device, the OS is one of the main selling points of the phone, and this newest update radically changes the design and the overall aesthetics of the OS, as well as adding some useful features like multi-user mode and battery saving mode. Also, Android 5.0 was designed to deliver a very fast and smooth experience, much like iOS, but with more animations, and generally just looking better. The Nexus 6 also does not disappoint when it comes to the specs. This phone has every latest top-line specification you could possibly want at this point in time. It has the latest Snapdragon 805 CPU, clocked in at 2.7 GHz and backed up by 3 GB of RAM. Supplying it all is a massive 3220 mAh battery. When it comes to the optics, the phone has a respectable 13 megapixel lens with OIS and it can film video in 2160p. And as you can imagine, this can produce some excellent looking images. The funny thing is, this is one of those few phones that really have no negatives. The phone costs $650 off contract and will most likely cost about $199 with the contract. So overall, this is a fantastic option and will be the first in line to receive updates from Google. So next let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy Note 4. Now this phone is identical